Hello, and welcome to another Window Hero webinar. My name is Christina Damshin, Business Development for Indo. May is Preservation Month, and Indo would like to give special thanks and to honor all the nonprofits out there working hard to enliven preservation awareness within their communities. One of the hurdles we must face as preservationists are the misconceptions around the costs involved in taking on an older structure. This can range from the time spent in upgrading some of the features, the complications in repairing some of the damages done to the structural elements of the building, or simply the fear of what might be behind that drywall. But we all know preservation is not about these momentary struggles. It is about continuation in our communities. It is about passing on stories from generation to generation and ensuring our short-term vision of the here and now does not disrupt a much bigger picture in that longer timeline. That's why we decided to take on what could be considered a scarlet letter within preservation: lead paint. This can often be a tricky subject to handle. The thing most people don't know is that it's incredibly easy to control. We just have to be prepared. Our speakers today want to express the seriousness of this issue so you can both understand the importance of handling it properly and know about the tools in order to do so. If you make this a priority, you will be able to easily control it and set the tone, just as with any other aspect of preservation. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Catherine Brooks of EcoStrip is a former board member of Lead Safe America, and Duffy Hoffman is a nationally known third-generation painter and craftsman who continues to suffer the side effects of lead poisoning. They really know the ins and outs of all aspects of lead paint, and they want to give you a full picture of the situation so you can have an understanding as to how to deal with it in your home. With that, we'll switch to our presentation, and at the end, we'll have a short question and answer section. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Catherine Brooks. I'm the owner of EcoStrip, and we sell a product that is used for lead-safe practices with stripping paint. So you're probably wondering how I got involved in all of this lead paint issue. It actually started because my background was in public health. And then I was interested in working with older homes. I lived in a town that had 18th century houses in it. We had an old one, and I started discovering that there were some things that we should not be doing as we tried to renovate our house. So then I was interested in this product, and the more I learned about lead, the more scared I got. And I started to get very involved in the education. What do painting contractors know about lead paint safety? What do homeowners who are restoring their homes know about it? And it was not much. So I got more involved and became on the board of a foundation called Lead Safe America, and was on that board several years and really learned that the issue in the States is education. Most people do not know what they're dealing with. So there's two myths that I want to start out with about lead paint. The first one is that the lead paint issue is only in low-income housing. And if you live in a middle-income neighborhood, you're fine, don't worry about it. It's just in these old government-funded buildings where the government and landlords aren't keeping their buildings well-maintained, the paint's deteriorating, the kids are at risk because they're crawling around, putting their hands in their mouths. They're not necessarily chewing on the windowsills. That's another myth. It's the dust. So that's the low-income side of it. So this kind of lead dust is in houses all over the U.S. Lead paint was not outlawed until 1978. So that means that houses built before 1978 have a very high likelihood of having lead paint on them. Now, the older the house is, the more likely it is. So if you go back to houses built before 1940, about 90% of them are likely to have lead paint in them. If you go from the 40s to the 60s, it goes down to about 70%. And houses in the 60s and the 70s, maybe a quarter of them had lead paint. So what has been happening in this country is, economically, a lot of people are buying older homes, not colonial historic homes, although that's happening, but younger families especially are buying these houses, these bungalows, etc., from the 1920s and 30s and 40s. and they can't afford new homes. So they buy older homes and they remodel them. And they're doing the work themselves because they can't afford to pay somebody to do this work. It can be expensive. And they have little kids. Children are the most vulnerable to lead poisoning. And the reason for that is their brains are still developing. All the organs in their bodies are still developing. And if they get even a tiny amount of lead dust in their systems, they can get irreversible organ problems, learning disabilities. Their IQ can be damaged for their entire life. Serious problems, anger issues. They're now discovering through the research that a significant portion of adults in jails were lead poisoned as infants. Nobody tested it. A side effect of lead poisoning is violent behavior. So in the States, they're starting to do more and more research in realizing the long-term impact of this poisoning of children. On the other end of the spectrum is people that are older doing this work, and they're not necessarily protecting them or their pets or the neighborhood. So the second myth is, this is only a concern if I have little kids in my house or my wife is pregnant. Those are the ones that we should worry about. Well, that's not true either, because adults can also get damaged with lead poisoning, and so can pets. You can kill your pets. If they're walking around the area, they're picking up dust on their paws, they're licking their paws, they're ingesting the dust, and they can get poisoned as well. What happens with lead is that you ingest it, it gets into your blood, and then it harbors in your bones, and it accumulates. It does not go away. It accumulates. So if you're exposed to lead dust or lead from other things, like before unleaded gas, there's other ways you can get lead, then the accumulation in your body gets greater and greater. With pregnant women, the pregnancy is drawing the calcium out of their bones for the fetus and drawing the lead out and getting lead into the fetus, and can also cause permanent irreversible damage to these kids. So that's basically the history of lead poisoning and why it is so critical. What Duffy's going to talk about, this is my colleague Duffy Hoffman. Duffy is a third-generation painter. He's been doing historic restoration for decades. I met Duffy because of his interest in our product, which we'll talk about later. But Duffy suffered severe lead poisoning, and he's going to talk to you about how that happened. Now, Duffy has been working with historic properties and restoring windows for decades. He has one of the safest workshops and does the safest lead-safe work practices of any historic restorationist I know. He got serious lead poisoning. So we're going to talk about what he does in his shop, and we're going to talk about what you as homeowners can do to protect yourselves, your kids, your pets, and in fact your whole neighborhood if you've got a lot of wind going around in your neighborhood. I want Duffy to share with you how he got lead poisoned. He's, as I said, very careful in how he works around lead, but he got lead poisoning. So Duffy, tell us the story.
Yeah, well, I found out about lead poisoning early on in my career when I started doing a lot of old houses, strip and paint. And we did a lot, I used to do a lot of exteriors as well. We would completely strip clapboard houses. We used all kinds of shrouded machines that sucked the dust into it with HEPA filters, Tyvek suits, you name it. We had it, plastic tarps all over the ground, and everything got cleaned up all the time. And that's when I first learned about how serious it could be. Because a couple of my workers got poisoned. So I started a whole lead protection program in my company. It cost a fortune to get it started, but it kept us out of trouble. So anyway, when I got lead poisoned, and all painters are walking around with lead poisoning, every one of them. We used to have a lead test every year. And, you know, we'd have guys up around, the number used to be 25, the OSHA rule was 25 UGs in the blood. It's a concern, get treated for it. And so I was working on a big giant job down in Ellicott City, Maryland, and we had all the windows out, and we had them caged up with wires so the critters couldn't get in. And of course I didn't know I was getting poisoned, but in the back of the house, the owner had men back there burning paint off of doors, and guys inside tearing plaster apart and doing all kinds of work with no interim controls, no negative air machines. And in the midst of it, I ended up getting lead poisoned. And I first had a mini stroke from it. And I didn't even know I had a stroke, and neither did the doctors know I had a stroke, and they misdiagnosed me as having heat stress because it was hot outside. A week later, I got back to the site, and I'm up on these rigs, and I'm caulking in these blocks, standing in front of these windows all the time. You know, I was sanding the windows too after the paint was off, getting them ready for primer and finish paint and things like that. And I got a giant pain come down my arm, and luckily I paid attention to it. And I got off the rigs, sat on the back of my pickup truck, and fell onto the ground in what they call tremors. Tremors. If you get tremors is the last sign of lead poisoning before death. And then I went to the hospital again, to the emergency room, and once again I got misdiagnosed for the second time. So anyway, long story short, I ended up in a hospital in Philadelphia, and they they took my test, they checked my lead levels, and I had 60 UGs of lead in my blood, which is way higher than anybody should ever have in their blood. I was in tremors for over 15 days.
Tell them what a tremor is. Demonstrate a tremor.
Tremors in your body goes like this, and you can't control it. And how I noticed it, I was trying to drive my truck, and my body went completely out of control, and I thought, there's something wrong here, and who knows what it is. And it was for 15 days. I was in the Einstein Brain Center. I was in it for 70 days, and it took 15 days for the tremors to stop. And what they did is they started to give me different kinds of vitamins that was actually chelating my blood slowly, because they couldn't chelate my blood. They were afraid they would kill me if they did that.
What's chelation?
Chelation is when they take, what they do is they actually, it's like a blood transfusion, and as the blood is coming out, they're treating it with chelated zinc. And the chelated zinc pulls all the lead out of your bones and your muscles and the places where it gets locked up into it. It's been 9 years since I was poisoned, and I still have the symptoms left from it, and they'll never ever go away. I have terrible nerve damage down my arm. My shoulders and my bones constantly ache me all the time. I also ended up with rheumatoid arthritis as well, because lead affects the bones. It also affects the blood flow. I have all kinds of nerve damage from it. When I had my 2 strokes in one day, I ended up with cerebral brain damage on the left side of my brain. And it'll never be perfect, and it's taken 8 years for me to actually be able to almost focus like I used to be able to. I also ended up with Tourette's from the lead poisoning. So, and the brain is kind of funny, because doctors don't even know why this affects different parts of the body. But now what I do for my protection, besides doing all my protection in the shop, is I take a whole bunch of vitamins that chelate my blood. And I take really powerful B vitamins, and then I take a lot of minerals and magnesium and zinc and things like that, and constantly. And it pulls all that stuff out of me. It cleans my bones, it cleans my body up, it cleans my blood up, and also, if you've been lead poisoned, what happens is you become desensitized to the lead, and little bits of it can spike you up really fast, and you don't get symptoms anymore. So you don't even know you're poisoned. And they say, oh, do your bones hurt? Well, my bones hurt all the time, so that wouldn't be a good way for me to figure out whether I was getting blood levels up again. So, it's not a joke, and I'm a witness to it can kill you. And one of the funny things is that a lot of times the bosses that are on the job sites are the ones that get most of the lead poisoning, because when they walk on the site, they forget to put on their mask. They'll show another worker how to do something, and if they keep doing it, they don't wash their hands when they get back in the truck, and so they keep exposing themselves. And if you're exposed all the time, over and over again, that's when you get to those high levels where you'll get spiked really high, and it can damage you really bad.
The thing that Duffy was emphasizing at the end, and I want to reiterate, is it's not reversible. And this is not only true for little kids with developing brains, but for adults. These symptoms Duffy has will never go away. So it's not something to take lightly. One of the other myths is that painters say, I've been doing this for decades. I've been a painter, I've been dry scraping houses, and I'm not sick. I'm fine. And my question is, really?
Yeah.
Have you ever had your blood tested? Have you ever had anybody ask you about the side effects of blood and whether you experienced any of those? I don't really think it's a joke. It's very hard to pay attention to these lead-safe work practices that we're going to talk about, but the cost in this country to special education for children, to the social services that are needed to take care of these kids, the prison systems to take care of these adults that have been lead poisoned, the IQ problems, special schools, all of these problems are extremely expensive in this country.
When I was in the hospital, my bill when I got out was $689,000.
Right. It's not.
And I still wasn't fixed.
Exactly.
I was just alive.
And he's still going to get examinations and testing and all of these things. The consequences of not dealing with this are huge and very expensive. Let's prevent the problem up front. And that's what Duffy and I want to talk about now. What do you do as a homeowner to protect yourself and your family and your pets and your environment from lead poisoning? One of the other issues about lead paint is not just the dust while you're doing the work, but it's also chips that may already have been occurring outside your house. If your paint is deteriorating on the siding on your house and there's chips dropping to the ground, those lead chips may get stepped on, they turn to dust, and they never go away. They just keep getting buried under more and more dirt. And there's situations where around schools, for example, they've had to cart away feet deep of dirt 8 feet out from the building because there's still lead dust in there. And the kids are playing in that lead dust in the dirt. And it's got to be removed. So it's important when you're working on the exterior of your house to also use lead-safe work practices. So we'll talk about that as well.
We're going to talk about lead-safe work practices for the homeowner. The homeowner, for one, and why it's a good situation for them to learn about how they can do that, is a homeowner doesn't have to follow the EPA certification rule. They can do anything they want inside their house. So they're more apt to poison themselves without having the knowledge of lead-safe work practices. The first part of lead-safe work practice, and we're going to look at a situation, you have a room in your house, whether it's a living room, bedroom, whatever room it is, it doesn't matter. And you're going to set that room up. And one of the first systems is isolation. I'm talking from a point of whether you have kids or you don't have kids, it really doesn't matter because you can still get poisoned. If you have children, you really need to take a good look into the difference between isolation and confinement. We're going to talk about isolation. You walk into a room, you have a door, and your house has a suction and vacuum. So every time somebody opens the back door, if you're not protecting that room that you're going to make lead dust in, it sucks it out into the rest of the house. That's not a good thing. So you go up to the door and you take a piece of plastic and you cover the outside of the door. And they have these things called these little stick-on zippers. You can put a slot down and put your zipper on there. So if you want to go in and out of that room, then you can do that. Then when you get on the other side, you put another piece of plastic on there and you just put a slit in the middle of it. And what that does, it keeps the suction from the house of pulling the plastic out. So you've got it sealed. You tape that thing tight around your frame of your door. Chances are when you pull the tape off, you're going to have paint come off. But that's just part of what you have to do to protect yourself. Whether you have a carpet or whether you have wood floor, it doesn't make any difference. Carpets are the worst because if you get lead dust into that carpet, you can shampoo till the cows come home and you're still going to have lead in your rug. So you take a piece of plastic, you could take regular visqueen plastic, you tape it down and tape it to the baseboards, or you can take, they have special rolls of like shrink wrap type stuff that have a stickum on it where you can actually roll it across and it sticks right to the carpet areas so you don't have to do a lot of taping. I'm not a fan of plastic to stand on because it becomes slippery, and plastic is electrostatic, so every time that you scrape lead dust around plastic, it clings and sticks to it. So you plastic down so the stuff doesn't get into your floor, whether it be a carpet or wood floor or tile floor, and then you take something that's called ram board. It's a gray material, comes in a roll. It's kind of a thick kind of paper, and you can get that at your local Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever you want to buy it, or a contractor's place that sells lumber. And you put that on the floor and you tape it down. That particular surface, you can vacuum it. So every time you're in that room and you're doing lead work, you go ahead and you vacuum it up. And I'm going to talk about the HEPA filters for the vacuum and some systems you can use. And it's also, you can mop it. So at the end of the day, when you get all your chips and stuff off, you take a bucket, it's going to wet it, but it'll dry. You're not trying to soak it. You just take, dampen your mop your floor up, and then you're good to go the next day when you walk in. Isolation is a situation where you're isolating yourself to that room, and you really don't want kids going in and out of it, but you're going to leave that room when you're done at the end of the day. So when you walk in that room to work, you're gonna have work clothes on, right? You don't want to take your clean clothes in there with you, because then you're only going to put dirty clothes on dirty clothes. That wouldn't make any sense. So outside the room, you leave the clothes there. I prefer, whether it's isolation or confinement, that you have a ladder outside the window, because most all your rooms in your house have at least one or two or more windows in it, and so you're going to want to. You're like when we're going to go through this, when you go to empty your vacuums out, there's a way to do it safely. You don't want to walk through the house with this bag that's now plastic on the outside. Electrostatic dust is still on it, and it's better just to go ahead and take it down from a ladder. It's safer that way. You're going to set your room up. You're going to want to open a window, put a fan in it so it's sucking the air out of the room, and that's unless homeowners aren't going to go out and buy a negative air machine. They're just way too expensive. So that's a good way to do it. A vacuum, if you have just a regular Craftsman vacuum or a rigid vacuum or a shop vac, you use ones that actually have a hole that sucks the dust into it, but it has an exhaust on the other side where it blows air out of it. You buy extra set of hoses, and we'll show you those. You hook it onto the exhale, and you take that and put it out the window, so that if dust is not being filtered properly, you're not putting it in the room. We'll get to the vacuum.
You can get HEPA filters for all those vacuums.
Yeah, you can. Most of your local Home Depots or Lowe's or even Sears Craftsman stores that sell those, they sell 99.9.7% at 3 microns. It does a really, really fine job of filtering things out all the time. And so you want to make sure that you're taking care of those kinds of things, because you want to make sure that you're safe. As far as being in that room, your setup's pretty much the same from isolation to confinement. And confinement means that you're not going to leave that room through the door. You're going to tape, seal it up, and you close the door, and you're never going to walk out of the room until you're done your stripping work or your scraping work that you're doing in the room. And then once you're all done with the room and you've got all your nice new paint and everything's been remodeled and restored, what you're going to do at that point is that before you do anything, you're going to clean that whole room up, you're going to vacuum it down, and then you're going to mop that board, then you're going to fold it up, and you're going to put it in plastic bags, good thick contractor bags, not cheap leaf bags. And then you're going to take the plastic and you're going to do the same thing with it, and when you're done, if you have a wood floor, you're going to wash the floor, because you don't know if you got dust got underneath there. And if you have a carpet, I would say get it shampooed. And if you're restoring that room, unless if it's an older carpet, I would suggest, if you have kids that are going to be living in that room, get rid of it. Just get it torn up, put new carpet in there. Because you don't know how much lead got there at the time before you bought that house. Somebody could have totally contaminated that rug, and you'd never know it. And if I was doing this and I had a little kid, I'd go ahead and take my kids after I got done down to the doctors and get them lead tested, just in case. People think pets is a big one. People don't even think about it. But I actually had a time where I poisoned a pet. And the owner kept letting the dogs out in the backyard. I said, don't let them dogs run around here. You're going to poison your dogs. Sure enough, they got poisoned. It cost him like $900 to get his dogs de-leaded. And it's not a fun thing to do. When you're working in that room, if you go to leave the room, take your clothes off, do your thing there. If you're going to go confinement, you go back out the ladder, go to your garage or your basement somewhere that's not in the house itself, change your clothes. Or if you want to, and it's kind of uncomfortable, but you could wear a Tyvek suit, which is a breathable material, and the dust doesn't get in there. And then at the end of the day, you can merely just take your Tyvek suit off, put it in a garbage bag, and then put your clothes on when you walk outside that room when you're down in your shop area. So you wouldn't really have to change your clothes, because you should be pretty clean, because they sell them where they've got booties and, your whole body is there. You want to make sure that you got some rubber gloves that you can put on your hands so that you're not getting, if you have cuts on your hands, you can get lead ingestion through your cut. It's not going to go real high, but you want to take all the precautions you can so you don't poison yourself. If you use lead safe work practice, it's pretty much common sense. And if you follow those ways, the chances of you getting highly lead poison would probably be almost nil. But a lot of people out there, there's certain things that you do, you don't even know you're doing them. So you need to be aware of it. As far as your protection, there's a few different ways. If you're removing paint with heat, whether it be an infrared, heat gun, heat plate, you need to protect yourself. These masks won't do anything for you if you're making organic vapors from the lead heavy metals. When you start heating it over 650, it starts to gas off, and you're sitting there breathing this stuff, and that's the worst way to get poison is from the actual gas. It's worse and it happens much faster too to you.
Those are okay when you're just dealing with the dust in the room.
Yeah, exactly. When you're scraping in dust, or you're emptying your vacuum out, or you're cleaning your room up. This one here is an N95. That's really good for particulate. If you're working in a more confined kind of space, I prefer to have what's called an N100. It's a much thicker mask, and it filters out a lot more particulate. Do not buy cheapos, because if you do, you'll notice at the end of the day, you take it off, oh, you got white stuff all around your nose. I wonder what that is. It's lead. They don't work. Even if you're sanding sheetrock spackle, you'll notice the guys when they're on a job site, they take their mask off and the whole face is full of dust. And so don't buy cheap ones. It's not going to do anything for you. If you're using heat to remove paint, you get yourself a respirator down to the local Sherwin-Williams or your mom and pop paint store. And I happen to use 3M ones, because 3M filters are, most stores carry them. Even Home Depot carries them, Lowe's carries them, and if you're doing dust and you're not doing any heating, this is an N100. And if anything's purple, that means it's a highly particulate filter, and that's what that means. And you put them onto your masks. And then if you're doing burning, and I don't have one of those masks out, but I will pull it out later when we're going to the cabinet over here. Mike will show you the OVs. Organic vapor. They have one that has a purple filter on the top, and it's called the combo. So it's doing dust, it does gas, it does acid, anything like that. So you're protecting yourself from anything then. And one of my rules is always assume lead is present. I don't care if your house is built in 1985, okay? If you didn't test it, and even testing it doesn't really say 100% that you don't have some lead in your house. Just pretend that there's lead present, therefore you're always protecting yourself from it. And that makes things stay safe. Your mask, you never want to put a mask on too tight. If you have a mask on and you see a big line around your face, you've got it on too tight, and it's actually harming you, because it's too tight, and the mask isn't able to work right, and you're actually going to get lead dust. These things here, beards, no-nos with masks. And if you're going to have something, you keep it tight so that any of these masks, you can't see any facial hair outside of it. Big fuzzy beards, you're not getting a seal, so it's going to help you, but it's not going to stop you from breathing lead dust in that particular time. So you really shouldn't have beards. It's not a good idea. And then again, not only your kids, but it'd be a good idea to get yourself tested after you finish this project. Because chances are you might have done something stupid and you might got a little spike of some lead. And people don't realize it. Window locks, door handles they painted. Don't assume there's no lead on them, because it's probably been painted with lead.
Okay, let's go back to talking about these dust masks and how to protect yourself in your home when you're working with lead paint dust. Duffy, go for it.
We were talking about this is an OV, an organic vapor filter. And the pink part of this is what filters for the particulate dust. The other part of the cartridge actually has charcoal in here, which will filter gas. and fumes and things like that. So that if you're working with a
High heat gun.
with a high heat gun or any type of heat or infrared or anything that has heat that's going to soften paint to take it off, you need to use these. And as far as paper masks, you really need to buy the high quality ones, whether N95 or an N100, and don't buy inexpensive ones from any of the hardware stores, because they really don't filter the dust that you want to be filtering when you're dealing with lead dust. As far as protecting yourself with the different clothing, wearing long sleeve shirts so that all the dust doesn't get all over you is a good way to do that. When you're done at the end of your day, you take your vacuum and you can vacuum yourself off wherever the dust might have gone on to you. Might be in your hair or wherever. You don't want to take your clothes off and shake them, or take your hat and shake it, because then you're just going to blow dust up in the air, and then you're going to breathe it 5 seconds later. As far as washing clothes, if you have children in the house, you should always wash clothes that you've been working around lead dust with, so you don't contaminate your kids' clothes at the same time. And keep your washer and dryer clean. If you're in the middle of a project for a couple of months, every time you go to put your kids' clothes in, it couldn't hurt you to go in there and wipe it out with a wet rag. A washing machine isn't as bad, because once lead gets wet, it doesn't go into the dust form, but it could cling to your children's clothes. So want to make sure you keep those things in mind when you're working around lead dust.
Let's talk about paint stripping methods. There's a lot of ways paints have been stripped over the decades and hundreds of years. Probably the most common one was just dry scraping. When you had alligator and peeling paint, you just get your scraper and catch that loose edge and just scrape off the loose stuff, sand it, feather it down so it's a little smooth, and paint right over it. Problem with that, we've talked a lot about lead dust. It's going everywhere. You can do sanding if you have a vacuum attached to it, a HEPA-vac. That's a high efficiency particulate vacuum that catches 99.9% of the dust. That's the only way you can safely sand lead paint, is to collect all that dust and then clean out your filters. We'll talk some more about that. Sanding is dust creating. Dry scraping is chip creating, and it becomes dust. The other old method was high heat guns, and unfortunately you still see that. You still see painters going around getting paint off with a high heat gun, open torches or heat guns with that blowing hot air. The danger of that is, too, at that 1,000-degree heat, you're vaporizing the lead in the paint. And number 3 about that is, you're also giving the potential to catch the building on fire. The heat with those methods goes behind the wood and stays in there. And long after you've gone off the job, 8-10 hours later, the wood behind there ignites. You've read stories about houses that have burned down, historic houses that have burned down when they were using high heat guns. So then there's the chemical method. There's some chemicals that are extremely toxic, that burn your hands, really harsh on the wood. There's also green ones that they call green ones now. They aren't as toxic, but they're still chemicals. And the downside of the chemicals are, one, you have to try to contain that gel from the chemicals. How do you contain all the paint in that gel? Second one is that you're wetting the wood with the chemicals. Most chemicals you have to neutralize. So you got the wet chemical first, then you have the second wet water, whatever, or another neutralizer. There's water again. Connected to that is power washing. That's a fairly common method that homeowners use because it's cheap. You just take a power washer with those nozzles on them. Most people don't know what kind of pressure to set it at. They don't know what kind of nozzle to put it on. And if it's too much pressure, you've got like wormholes all over your house. I did that. I know. You really need to know what you're doing so that if you're going to use power washing, you're safe with it, you don't damage the wood, but you also have to collect all that water and filter out all those paint chips. A more current method of stripping paint using heat is low heat, and it's from infrared. Infrared heat operates in a different way than heat guns and open torches. What it actually does is the infrared rays go into the paint and they go into the wood below the paint, and the molecules are jiggled in there. That creates the friction, and the bottom layer of paint separates from the wood. The infrared rays also open the grain of the wood, and the natural resins come up, and some of the paint that's sunk in a little bit, that can also come up. So what you're doing is you're not overheating the wood, so it's very gentle on the wood, and you're also making the paint soft because it bubbles up in less than a minute, and then you scrape it off and you're not generating dust. It's soft paint. Comes off in clumps, drops to the ground on your sheeting. If you step on it, yeah, it'll become dust again, but at least while you're doing the scraping, it's soft and not generating dust. So there's a lot of different ways to strip paint, a lot of different tools to strip paint, and no one of them will do every job. So a lot of painters have different tools that they take around with them depending on what they're doing. Windows or doors are very tight spaces where they have to get into them to strip the paint. So you want to have a lot of different options, but you want to do it safely. You don't want to generate dust in the open air. You don't want to generate lead fumes and other high metal fumes or toxic metal fumes. And you don't want water or chemicals coming around the ground and leaving chips and dust in your ground. So what I gave you was an overview from sort of a layperson's point of view. What I want Duffy to do is talk about his experience and a little more detail about these different methods and how they're used in different situations.
Well, originally, and I did a lot of all this ever since I started years ago. I went through every single tool. And the first way that we used to take paint off was with a torch. And you can imagine how many fumes comes off a torch. And not a good way to do it. And as far as being dangerous, setting a house on fire, torches and heat guns, I started a house on fire one time. And that was it, just one time. And as soon as I started a house on fire, that's when I started using another method that Catherine didn't mention, but they have different machines out there. One's called a paint shaver, the one's called a paint planer. And they have a shroud on the back of them where you can hook it up to your vacuum, keeps the lead dust down, and when it shaves it, it's kind of like what the infrared does. It comes off in pieces rather than it being sanded and causing a lot of dust particulates in the air. That way you can't catch the house on fire. Then as far as your heat guns now can only, when they come into the country, because most of them are made in Japan, they come in and it can only be 1,100 degrees. They used to be 1,500 degrees. But it really doesn't make any difference, because when you're using a heat gun, same thing, any kind of a heating element, and that gets really hot fast. What happens is, especially if you're doing clapboards on the house, is the clapboards have a crack under them, and what happens is when Mrs. Jones opens the back door, it sucks the air up under the clapboards, and if you have the heat in there, and there's a lot of dirt up in there. So the house, when it's ventilating, is pulling dirt up under the wood, so it's really dangerous to use heat things unless you do it the right way. If you want to use a heat gun some places, that's fine. What you need to do is get a tank sprayer or a spray bottle and spray every crack you see. Take the paint off, spray it again so that you know it's not on fire, and all stop at least an hour before the end of the day if you're using any kind of a heat tool, even a speed heater, and inspect all the spots that you did on the house just to make sure. Me, after starting a house on fire, I take the tank sprayer and I spray every crack down the third time, just so I could go to sleep at night not knowing I'm going to burn Mrs. Jones's house to the ground. It happens. It still happens today. As far as your chemicals, wood isn't supposed to have chemicals put on in the first place. If you're interior removing and you use chemicals, it's not as bad, because your wood isn't being put into the elements, and there's not moisture being put to them direct. Not a bad way to do it for some people. Exterior, what happens is you put your chemical on the wood and then you scrape it, and what happens is it shoves all the pigment back down into the grain. So you still have lead present. It doesn't cure your lead problem. One of the biggest problems is when you neutralize, is the biggest problem. You use a chemical to neutralize it, you're soaking the wood to death, and the biggest problem with paint, it fails because of moisture. So if you're putting water into the wood, you better be, taking the time to spend the time not to paint too soon.
Days? Are we talking days to dry?
Yeah, 2, 3, 4 days. And so that's not the best way to do it. But it does work. Inside, it's not as bad. But outside, what happens with it, and I've seen it happen many times, moisture will reactivate the chemical in the wood from the backside. And your house breeze, there's always moisture in it it's from your stove, it's from your showers, your baths. And if the moisture gets into that chemical and reactivates it, what it does starts to eat the paint off from the inside out, and you'll see many times you drive by somebody's house and he's out there and he's got his shutters all painted up real nice, but he had them dipped at the dip stripper, and 4 years later you see the paint just curl and falling off of it. That's what chemicals can do. As far as neutralizing it, it's almost impossible to 100% neutralize it. And your natural ones that they have out there, they have an orange stripper and they got a soybean stripper, and it's got chemicals in it somewhere, so you're still dealing with a chemical product. As far as power washing, worst thing you can do to your house is put water all up into all the cracks and make it soaked up, and then think you're gonna, in one day, start scraping, prime it, and paint it. You're gonna have paint failure all over the place, what's gonna happen to it. And you should know how the house is built, because in some houses, they may have insulated it. So if you soak that insulation down, it's gonna fall down to the sill, and eventually it's gonna rot. You can do some rotting in your wood or your 2x4s and stuff like that. And also, they used to brick pack houses. So if you see orange stuff coming out, it means it's brick pack. And most painters or people will still keep trying to wash it because they want to get rid of the red stuff. And in the midst of it, the bricks are sucking up the water, and now you got nothing but a moisture pit sitting there, and it'll make failure. The infrared remover, what it does, it's not much different than the way steam would work removing paint, but you can't take your house and put it in a steam box. So the steam box is more of a shop orientated thing. But your infrared, you put it on the surface, and what it does, it heats deep into the grain. It softens the resin. The resin comes up to the top of the wood, and it pushes the paint off, and then you scrape it off. And it's the method that you can almost be guaranteed when you're done with your processes, you're not going to have any lead left. And that's one of your key points of a lot of times interior, is you're getting rid of the lead off of something. I look at taking paint off as, it's all this thick, crappy, it's all alligator, it's falling off, it's failing. So if you remove it, instead of painting your house every 5 years, you can go and maybe just put a fresh coat every 10 years. You won't have that type of labor-intensive stuff that happens at the beginning of the job by having to scrape paint off. So that's pretty much the experiences that I've seen. And the infrared, if you use it correctly, you don't go to lunch and leave it on the house, or go to the bathroom and leave it on the house. I still, when I use one of these outside on clappers, I still spray water, just because it's a good safety point where you can always be guaranteed that you're not causing a problem. But the speed heater isn't blowing heat up under the clappers or into the soffits. It's just sitting there. And it's heating, doing the same thing as if you were just doing a window. It just heats that paint up and you scrape it off. So it's probably one of the safest methods that you can find, besides using paint shavers and paint and mechanical machines, which you have to be experienced to use those, because they're dangerous, and it takes a good operator not to destroy the wood in the house when you're doing it.
Another method that I want to talk about that is sometimes used in addition to whatever method you're using to strip paint is wet sanding. If you're using chemicals, or you're using heat, or you're dry scraping, sometimes there is some of the paint that is really sunk in there and you want to get it off. Again, you don't want to dry sand. Just take a bottle of water and mist that bare wood down and scrape it. And you'll keep the lead dust from flying around. It's very simple. Whenever you're stripping inside a house, have a spray bottle of misted water. Duffy's talking about having something, a garden pump sprayer with a wand with water and putting it up in the house, same issue. Just have water present. A common question that we get from homeowners is, I very carefully collected the waste, I've double bagged all this paint waste that's got lead in it, now what do I do with it? It's going to depend on your local ordinance. Before you even start the project, see if you can find online what are the hazardous waste procedures in your county or city or whatever. They're different. Contractors have to be very rigorous in the procedures that they follow. Unfortunately, the same is not true for homeowners, but to be nice to your neighbors in your community, find out what the rules are so you're disposing of those plastic bags safely. If you need more information, about lead-safe work practices and how to work with lead paint in your home, go to the EPA website. It's epa.gov/lead.